am a true born Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
Belize my home, my native land.
Tell them that we born there.
I want you people to understand.
Tell them that we born there.
I am proud to be a Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there. I am a true born Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
Belize my home, my native land.
Tell them that we born there.
I want you people to understand.
Tell them that we born there.
I am proud to be a Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there. I am a true born Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
Belize my home, my native land.
Tell them that we born there.
I want you people to understand.
Tell them that we born there.
I am proud to be a Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there. I am a true born Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
Belize my home, my native land.
Tell them that we born there.
I want you people to understand.
Tell them that we born there.
I am proud to be a Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there.
Tell them that we born there.
You're born there, you're born there. I am a true born Belizean.
Tell them that we born there.
Belize my home, my native land.
Tell them that we born there.
I want you people to understand.
Tell them that we born there.
I am proud to be a Belizean.
And greetings. Welcome to another episode of Navel String Connections. I am Bilal Morris, live from my studio here in Los Angeles. And Belize, we want to invite Belize across the globe, the Belizean diaspora, Belizeans living in the United States, in the United Kingdom, Africa, Asia, all over where this Belizean diaspora sits. We want to invite you to tell one about Navel String Connection, the Belizean show in the Belizean diaspora, coming to you live and direct on XTV. Navel String Connections is an XTV production. It is sponsored by the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. Our producer is Nur Muhammad, and our executive producers are XTV, thanks to the man Most High, the man behind the control, always, that help us to bring the show and make it possible. The technical parts, Harlan, the man in the studio, and we want to say that this show has been now past 2 years, going for 3 years in its inception. Navel String Connections try to bridge the gap between Belizeans at home and abroad. We feature those Belizeans who are the movers and shakers in the Belizean diaspora across the United States, across Europe, wherever they are. We have brought a lot of voices, a lot of Belizean voices who have lived in some of the most amazing places like Thailand and Belgium, right? And we want to and say that we are honored to have had a show that gives us that opportunity to feature these outstanding Belizeans who are making big strides in helping to develop Belize. We want to thank the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations who had that vision. For many years, we have had governments come and go, but they have just had a diaspora this. This time we have a minister and a government who have said, no, let's put some more meaning to the diaspora issue. Not only for the remittances that they send from abroad, the millions, but we also want to see how we can bring the diaspora in to help develop the country of Belize. And the Belizean diaspora have been developing the country of Belize. And with that as a background and a backdrop, we want to always give our viewers, especially those viewers who are recently joining us. And we know this show with the man that is sitting in his studio in Houston that this show has been promoted from the beginning of the week. And so we want to welcome our brother, Derrick Straughan, better known as Dickie Straughan. Dickie Straughan has recently published his new book, The Music History of Belize, and we are going to be having him as a guest today, talking about this phenomenal piece of work that he has done. I don't think that there is Evan X had wrote a book on Belizean sports history, but I've never seen a book on Belize's music history. And reading it, I had to take browse through it again and just looking at the highlights of the various chapters that our brother Dickie Straughan has covered in this outstanding piece of acclaim work. And we want to welcome our brother to XTV and to Navel String Connections. Greetings, Dickie.
Thank you, my brother. Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
Yes, we appreciate that, man, that you were able to accept the invite. It's been a little while. We've been trying to get you to come on, but it was a beautiful thing to know that you were in process of publishing this historic piece of work. And, you know, before we go into that, we go into your book. Let's talk about, man, where your navel string me bury me, brother. Where you were born and your upbringing from primary school and whatever it is. I know just reading your bio, you were back and forth between Belize and the United States. Talk about where your navel string me bury, Dickie.
My navel string bury right at Belize, right at Dean Street. That's it. That's home. That's where I was born. That's where I grew up. And every time I go back to Belize, that's where I go, you know, Dean Street. So Belize
Yes,
is
man.
where my navel string buried.
Yes, yes. So tell us about your upbringing from a kid, schools that you attended, and your high school life. How did your music life develop? Was it from a primary school level, from an elementary school level? Talk about how the humble beginnings of Derrick Dickie Straughan as a musician. How did that musical gift developed in you?
I guess it was something that was always there from the time I was born. We had musicians in the house. My uncle played, my cousin Donnie played, and at the time, those are the musicians that I knew that were in the family, right? And I also remember as a child, you know, sometimes as you grow up, you forget certain things, but then after a while you remember. And I can remember that as a baby, my mom used to put me in her lap, and she would sing and play the piano, you know. So I guess it started then. It started at that time, and then my mom and dad got married, and so that band Deep Harmony used to practice at our house. They practiced at different places around Belize, but during that period of time, they used to practice at our house, you know. And after they got done practicing and everybody go home, they would leave the bass and the drum inside a room that we had in the downstairs of the house, you know. And I remember I used to go in there, man, I used to play the hell out of them two things, the drums and the bass. Didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I was, you know, I was amazed by just having these instruments and having access to them and just to get in there and fool around with them. And I guess it started there. It started there again. And then when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my mother sent me to go study piano with Miss Dolly Grant on South Street. So I started taking lessons with her on piano, you know. And then, of course, Hattie came around. And so we left Belize after that incident, and lived in the States for about, I don't know, 2 years, 2.5 years or something like that. And then we returned back to Belize, and then my grandmother was a childhood friend of Mr. Andrews. They grew up together in Mullins River. So when we got back to Belize, my grandmother sent me to sent me and my cousin to start taking music lessons with Mr. Andrews. So at that time, I switched to the trumpet. And so that went on for a couple of years. And then we left Belize again, around 67 or so. And at the time, I was attending St. John's School, you know, so anyway, so we left Belize. I did, came back to Belize, that is, did St. John's, did St. Michael's for a couple of years, and then we left Belize again, 67, and came up to the States. And that was when I switched to the saxophone and played saxophone in high school and stuff like that. So that was I guess the beginnings, if you want to call it that. That's how I began.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. You know, that whole cross-culture pollination, being in Belize, and then you moved into the United States. You did some of your high schools in the United States, right?
Yes, yes.
Right? You did also,
Right.
and then you had high school from St. Michael's, and then when you
Right.
went to the States, to New York, you did high school there. You had a exposure of both worlds.
Yeah, looking back at it, I guess you could say I did, yeah, at a young age, you know.
How about musically in high school? Did you get exposed to any of the American music in high school? In American high
Well,
school?
in high school, I played in orchestra. And so we played a lot of music, like from Guys and Dolls. I don't know if you know that Broadway play. We did that kind of music. We did music from West Side Story.
Wow.
And we played basically a lot of music from Broadway plays, you know. So I was exposed to that, to playing that kind of music. But what really happened is that in my high school orchestra, I met this Italian guy named Jerry LaMonica. And I realized quickly that Jerry was the best player in the band. He played tenor saxophone just like I did. And so Jerry and I became friends, you know, we became very good friends. So I used to ask questions like, you know, like, what do you do? What do you study? Blah, blah, blah. And it was Jerry who told me about this workshop in Manhattan that he attended. And he invited me to come along with him one night, and I did, and I just listened, and it was a workshop that played big band music. This guy, Lynn Oliver, he had a studio, and all the bands who came into New York to do shows or to perform, not all the bands, but most of the big bands, they would come to his studio to rehearse before going on stage. And one of the things that he did, that he wouldn't charge them the full price to do the rehearsals, but he would get a copy of their catalog, that whole band's catalog. And it ended up that he had the catalog for the let's say the Tommy Dorsey big band. He had the Jerry Mulligan big band. He had all the big bands. He had it. He had those charts. So when I started going up there, I had the opportunity to read music from those arrangements. Let's put it that way. But I do remember, man, the first night I went up there and I listened, I liked what I heard. But when I actually signed up and got into that band and sat in that section, in that saxophone section, and started playing, and I always say this, I felt like I had died and went to heaven. It was the sweetest thing, the most beautiful thing to sit there and hear all these different harmonies and parts being played and people just reading the heck out of music. And of course, I could read, but my reading was nowhere up to where these guys were.
Yeah.
Because the way they ran things, they didn't stop for you. If you couldn't keep up, you just fell off and you got back on where you could. And if you fell off again, well, that's up to you. But eventually I caught on, my reading improved and that type of stuff. And so I stayed up there with Lynn for about 3 or 4 years. I started with the B group because he had two groups going on at the same time. He had a B group and he had an A group. So I started out with the B group, And after about a year or so, I transitioned to the A group. And at one point, he picked me out to lead the B group. So I learned a lot just being up there with them. And the thing that was phenomenal about being up there is that a lot of the musicians who came up to Lynn Oliver were guys who were actually playing in the music scene. I mean, at a high level. Some of them may not be working for a while, so they would just come up there just to keep their eyes, as they put it, their breathing chops, you know, intact. And so I got to meet a lot of people who knew what they were doing, you know. And so I took advantage of that situation, and I would, you know, ask people, you know, hey man, you know, how do you improvise? How do you learn to improvise and stuff like that? And the thing about it, these guys were willing to share information. And it's not like they had it and kept it to themselves. No, they were willing to share the information. And so this one alto saxophone player, he was the lead alto player, he wrote down some things for me, and he said, yeah, you know, practice this, you know, learn it in all the keys and so on and so on and so forth. And then, you know, one thing led to another. I eventually kind of, you know, figured out what I had to do. And so, yeah, so that was Lynn Oliver's studio.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you started out at St. Michael's and then you finished in the United States high
Yes.
schools, or?
Yes,
So you graduated out of American high school.
yes, I went to
Awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the questions that you always, when you meet people like you, Dickie, and you ask the question, the question arises, you see musicians like you. What has happened to music today in that you would hear the criticism that they have taken music education out of the American high schools? Why you don't have bands anymore like Earth, Wind and Fire and Ohio Players and the great R&B bands, and that the music today in the United States, especially black music, is not on the caliber that it used to be because the government had taken music education out of the schools. I mean, Belize is a whole different case. But talk about that, if you may, from your musical standpoint and your training, or getting high school training, because most of these bands were coming out of high school. I mean, they had good musical education, you know, that before they formed bands that
Yes,
made
yes.
them play on that level. Take just an example like a musician like Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire, you know, reading his book, you know.
They started music at a young age, and they started it in middle school.
Yeah.
But that's where, well, put it this way. In elementary school here in the States, you go through what they call an introduction to music. So they would play these flutes or recorders, let's say, that type of stuff, from grade 1 to grade
Right.
6. At middle school is when students are introduced to instruments, right? So they go through that phase. For middle school is like 2 years, right? 7 and 8th grade. And so they're introduced to instruments at that point. And then when they get to the high school level, which is 9, 10, 11, and 12, they go even further with the instrument of their choice, or whatever the case may be. Thing about it is that you would be amazed to listen to kids at the high school level, the quality and the command that they have of the instrument. And this is at the high school level. And see, the thing is that parents, once they get their child into music, not only do they take lessons at school, but most of them have private tutors.
Yeah.
You know? So coming back to your question about music being taken out of schools, I don't know if that's really what's happening, because here in Houston, my grandson played music in the middle school band. And when they do a show, man, it's like 3 or 4 or 5 different bands. And all these bands have like 50 students. And they are playing, I mean, at the junior high school level, they are playing pretty damn good. And like I said, when they get to the high school level, you would look at these children at that level and call them professionals. That's how well the level of music, that's how much they have advanced between middle school and high school. By the time they get to college, they are already playing at a professional level. So when they get to college, it's a matter of fine-tuning certain things, or it's not that they're learning how to play, they already know how to play.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So by the time they get out of college, that level of playing has also increased to an even higher level.
Mm.
You see? But the thing is that music in schools, in Belize, we need to be more serious of how we do it. That music has to be on the curriculum. On the schedule, on the daily schedule. They have to play while they're in school. That has to be on the schedule. For argument's sake, my son's wife, she is a counselor at the middle school level. And so when students come into the school, they got to come see her to get their schedule of what classes they're going to take. And so she's also responsible for putting students in different classrooms and so on and so forth. I was surprised when she told me that the first thing she does when she's making up her schedule for the year, is that she makes sure that she can get all the students in orchestra in that classroom all at the same time. That's her first priority, to get all the students that are doing band or whatever orchestra, to get those students in the classroom all at the same time. And then, of course, once they leave, students go to different classrooms, as you know what I'm saying? But the priority is to get all those students in the classroom in band all at the same time. So the point I'm trying to make is the way they approach music is not something that's done after school. They give it a much higher priority than that. It has to be scheduled during the school hours, and all these students get to band when they're supposed to.
Yeah, you're so right, because I teach middle school, right? And I would love to visit the music room. The music teacher, Mr. Kaplan, very good friend of mine, and I'm a music enthusiast. I could play something at a certain level, so I would go in there and check with him. And most of my 8th graders, which is, I would see them in there, and when the big performances with his orchestra, I would see my students in there, and I would tease them when they come back the next day. I'm like, boy, I didn't know you played trombone, man. I didn't know you played saxophone, because this is math and science, and you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I would have never thought that these kids were like, until I see them in the orchestra, and I would go by and say, hey, Kaplan, you got quite a few of my kids up in here,
Yeah.
But they would, I would like challenge them when they come back to class in my subject matter, and then I would ask them how they like it, and they would like, we love it. I'm like, I never knew you could do this. I never knew you had the ability. I would walk in that music room and watch kids jump from trumpet to drums to a bass guitar and then a piano, and they move between it, and they look at you like, that's easy. you know?
Yeah.
And it's just to see the level. And I know what the question I wanted to ask you is, you had an interesting musical development, being that you had exposure to two worlds, right? Both in Belize, you started out there. You had training from people like Mr. Andrews, right?
Right.
And Majeli talked about the fact that he and Lucio Alcocer, they learned music at Hostel. But that when he got to Canada, he thought he was playing something.
When he got to
the music teacher, this jazz guy, told him, you're good. You can play everything you hear, but and he thought that Bilal and Pete Matthews were something until which was his idol. Talk about that, if you may, Dickie, this whole cross-culture pollination in music and this transition. And why is it that, are we going to say, well, we never had in Belize good music teachers when we make that transition out of Belize into a place like the United States? and Europe, where music is highly developed, right? And their people are highly developed, being that they have resources. In your book, you talk about access to instruments and things like that. Talk about that, if you may, and how you feel that that has impacted a lot of Belizean musicians who come out of the Belizean training or the Belizean exposure to music, may be at some level, private tutors, or they play it in primary school or they play it in high school, which is barely there. Music education, you could talk about Palotti and maybe Catherine's, and I remember coming up in Michael's, and you went to Michael's, Dr. Young, and his encouragement in, playing the steel pan, and he's taking you to the library to read up about Mozart and Beethoven and the music, music education in a way, but not to the level that the United States have it. That's what you just talk about. Talk about that whole process of making that transition, and you made that transition from a lesser developed music program into a highly developed music program.
That's a very good question. Like everybody said nowadays. First of all, I'll say this, that in my progression in playing music, one of the things that at one point I sort of thought, I figured out, is that because of the kind of music that we listen to in Belize and what we hear, Latin music, bolero, we hear different styles of music. And so when I, playing in the US and playing with different groups and different styles, I was able to adapt to that style because I'm kind of familiar with this kind of music. If it was Latin music, if you're playing in a jazz band and you'd have a Latin part of it, and so you could relate to the Latin because, or the calypso part of it, because it's something that you're kind of familiar. It's a style of music that you're familiar with, let's put it that way. So that was one of the things that I always credit coming out of Belize. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes to the part of actually studying music, and you have to understand too that in Belize we have people who do piano, and that's a whole different thing from people who do band like Pete and the Jelly and BILAL. That's a whole two different sectors. Two different parts of music. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so you read piano music and you play it, and people, you read what's on the paper, and you play that back. When it comes to a different type of music, like jazz or music that's popular music, or when it comes to improvisation, that calls for a whole different skill. Not just the reading it off the paper and playing what you see, that's one thing. But when it comes to the people who are playing popular music with jazz or Latin or so, that's a whole nother study. Let's put it that way for argument's sake. I remember when I started studying with Mr. Andrews, he wrote out the scale, C major scale, and then he wrote the relative minor that goes with that scale. And like, okay, and what did that mean? I didn't know what the hell, I really didn't fully understand what it meant. But what he was telling me was, this is, how should I put it? This is what music is about. You got the scale and you got a minor scale that related to that. When I went up to Lynn Oliver Studio and I started studying with Lynn Oliver, he wrote the C major scale and he wrote the relative minor. And right away, my mind says, oh, I've seen this before. Mr. Andrews wrote this for me on a piece of paper. And I was like, yeah, cool. But not only did he write the natural minor that goes with that major scale, he also wrote the two other minors that goes with that major scale. The natural minor, then you have the harmonic minor, and then you got the melodic minor. So you got the one major scale and three minor scales that go along with that. You see? So what I'm saying is that in Belize, we have a certain amount of information about music, but there's a lot of information that's missing. And I'll just simply put it that way. There's a lot of information that just simply that is missing, that we never came in contact with it. One of the advantages that people in the States who study, they can sit with somebody across the table and have a conversation, and we can talk elbow to elbow, and we can ask questions, and you get answers, and they give you all, and there's so much more information that's available. Information that's not available in Belize, and it wasn't available, hasn't been available. Let's put it that way. That's all I'm going to say. There's a lot of information that we are missing.
That's a very good point. And I'm talking to you off the record. You know, I asked you certain questions, and that has always been your thesis, that it's not the musician's fault, or it's not the way the orchestra is playing. It's just that the information was not there. The music information was not there, and which is a perfect point, which explains a lot of things why Belizean musicians develop the way they do, or why Belizean music developed the way it is. But then I want to go back to the whole point.
Sorry, or has not developed.
Has not developed, right?
As it should.
Yes,
right.
Yes. But you had a beautiful metamorphosis in terms of your progression, because then, no, you saw music exposed in two worlds. You were exposed to music in two worlds, that is. And then in around 1980, you returned back to Belize, right? And you returned back to Belize, and you transfer that awesome body of knowledge, which was very revolutionary. For me, the return of Dickie Straughn in 1980 or 1979, I can't remember if it was one of those years, but correct me if you may. And what you did with the formation of the band Bamike Bandula was incredible. But hanging out with people like Michael Hyde during that time, and I saw you in a process. You know, when you return back, your dreadlocks, you drive in this blue van. The first time I see a mixing console, you know. And a very interesting thing was there, because Pete was my cousin. And you and Pete was in the studio, and you said you can't really remember this, but I remember seeing you play. You had a little portable record player, man. And I was there hanging with Michael and just watching it from Mr. Coffin place there where you had your studio, right? And I remember seeing you play that Freddie Hubbard. I never forget it was a Freddie Hubbard. And you played it for just a couple seconds, and then you went to the blackboard and you wrote out the notes on the staff. And I was like, this dude is bad, right? And Pete has his horn, and the both of you were rehearsing with Pete. You were playing, just playing.
Yeah.
And Michael Hyde, remember, he was like, boy, Dickie Straughn having us play giant steps, and we were like, what's that, right? You know, we were just amazed because we were still in high school, and this musical, you know, guy has returned, a Belizean. We'll talk about that whole process, because it's a very exciting time for us, because I say that you had revolutionized the way how music was played through a lot of Belizean musicians like Michael Hyde, who became a part of that band called McGregor, Deli McGregor, Easy Judah, and all of them that belong to that band. Because when Belizean heard that band, they were first time hearing that kind of sound. Talk about what you did, Dickie, because I mean, I don't mean for the powder you're like with the right, but talk about musically what happened there, the transition, your return back. You brought back this whole caliber of music, this information that you claim that was missing, this music education, this music information. Talk about what you did and what happened there, because that was a very, very dynamic process.
Before I went back to Belize, I went back to college. I was going to Five Towns College up in Long Island, New York, studying music while I was playing and stuff like that. And I don't want to dramatize this, but I want to say that having been around musicians like Mr. Andrews, particularly being a member of the Imperial Band, I was 14 years old, 15, whatever, or something like that. But I was always amazed by the stories that they told and the jokes that they, you know, would tell about musicians. They would tell one, and it was just stories that they told to entertain one another. I'd really no, how would I put it? It's just stuff that made you become more interested in music. Let's just put it that way. And anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that I always had that thing in me where music in Belize was important due to Mr. Andrews. So at that time, I felt that there's a lot of information. As I got to where I was getting all this information and picking up all this stuff, I realized that this is stuff we need to know in Belize because it's missing, it's lacking, and musicians are coming up and growing up and they're losing all this stuff and they're not getting it. And the longer I stay out, or the longer or they are kept away from this information, the situation will become worse. So I wanted to stop, to change that. So a little bit impulsive, and I decided, you know what? I don't need to keep going to college. I dropped out of college and I decided I want to go back to Belize and share this information. That's my purpose. That's what I wanted to do. And so that's what I tried to do. And the information I was giving to Heidi and them, is what I had learned. You know, when you play chords, don't play this, not to say that 3-finger chords are not necessary at some point, but there's more to playing chords than just that. You need to not just play what you hear, but know what you're playing and know how to execute it and know how to change it and know what it is so that you can do what you want with it. So I started teaching them about scales and voicing, piano voicing in particular, to get a different sound. One of the things we don't do in Belize, and we don't play chords, we don't play 7 chords. We would play the C, the E, and the G, the 1, 3, 5, and that's it. But in terms of 7ths and 9ths or 11ths, we don't use that in our music. And a part of the reason we don't is that is because the kind of music we play doesn't call for that sound. So we never seem to develop that kind of sound in our heads. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that was one of the things I tried to pass on to the guys in the band. You know, start looking at music from a different point of view. Understand what it is you're doing. Know what you play a chord. Know what that chord is. Know what it's connected to. Know what scales and what notes are available to you with that chord. And then as you start adding changes together, then you can see how to manipulate things to get to where you. So I call it the number system because it leads people talk about C, E, and G, blah, blah, blah. Well, one of the things I discovered over here with being around musicians here, they don't necessarily call C, E, and G. They know that they're in a certain chord and they will tell you, oh, play the 7th. And you better know what the 7th is. They're not going to tell you a note. They will just tell you, play the 3rd or play the 9th. And if you don't know what that is, and if you have to figure it out, you just missed the boat.
Yes.
So what I passed on to them was to look at these things in a different way. Look at it differently, you know. And they picked some of it up, but I have to say that I don't think that went outside of our group. I don't think other musicians caught on to it and that it went, that piece of music, you know, went to other people in Belize. I don't think they ever got that information. I still don't see it, you know. Unfortunately, it's not there. Right? The guys in Bamiki got it to some point, and then they left, and so that information was not passed on to other musicians. The things that did pass on to them was like that they did pick up on is what they saw, the mixing board, la la la, and all of that. All that is well and good, but
yeah,
that, you know,
Yeah, with the in-depth thing. Mr. Andrews and them knew that?
Knew what?
That kind of music information.
I want to say no. That information was not available to them.
Yeah.
That way of looking at music, because wasn't that's not what they did. That's not. But I have to say that regardless of the fact where this information may not have been available to them, they still did great things with the information that they had.
Yes.
You know, look at the marches that they wrote. Mr. Andrews wrote some march, a couple of marches. Chichen Acosta wrote some marches. Other people wrote marches. How did they do these things? Even with the limited information that they had, if you want to use that word limited, or the little information that they did great things with it, and you have to respect that, you know, because one of the things I wrote in the book is that these marches that we play around September, 10th of September and so are the all-time favorites of Belizeans. Anytime you play one of them marches or whatever, you go to a Belize dance and you play one of them marches, you know what happened? You see it. Everybody get up and they start waving the flag and they start. That's the most
feeling.
Those marches are the most memorable to Belize people. And these guys did that with the limited information they had.
Yes,
and that's to me, that's amazing.
You hear the music that was put to the national anthem that was written by the words written by Samuel Haynes. I mean, an incredible. You hear a lot of anthems, you know, like I was watching the World Cup today. You hear a lot of anthems, and some of them, to me, they just not a gel, right? They don't sound good, right? But that Belize national anthem, I mean, it just had a spirit in it, Dickie, in terms of who wrote it and what went into it. Talk about that, if you may, about the man that wrote that anthem and what you think went into the music of the Belize national anthem.
Well, I don't know if I could really answer that question as to what went into it from that point of view. I wrote about him. And there's not a lot of information about him in Belize.
Yeah.
What did he do before he left Belize? Where did he play? Which band did he play with? What instrument he played? There's almost no information on him in Belize presently. We don't know who this person was.
Yeah.
And so by digging and digging, I finally came across where he left Belize around by 1927, 28, somewhere around it, just before the Depression. He lived in Chicago. He studied some music, he played. And as a result of the Depression, there was this program that was set up for musicians and out of work. And he participated in that, you know. And he eventually went to the University of Chicago, and he studied for a while. He studied in England, but then he got his doctorate in the States. So here's a person who left Belize with whatever information that he had picked up coming out of Belize, but then he studied and he got to the point where he, I guess, did that arrangement of that march. I mean, I'm trying to answer this the best way I can. Yeah. It's a very good arrangement. Right. And what I find, those arrangements from the past, the marches, the patriotic songs. Yes. And if you would look, and that's the reason why I put them in the book, because if you would look at these songs and analyze them and see what's going on with them, you will realize that these guys were as limited as the information that they had was. They did some remarkable things with what they had. And then Selby Young, having come out of Belize and
Yeah.
Studied arranging and all of this stuff. He finally did what he did with that, wrote that arrangement. It's a beautiful arrangement again.
Yeah,
Key changes, it's not.
Yeah, that's so true, and I love your spin on that because it's very exciting to hear you as a musician, Belizean musician who have transcended both worlds, both Belize and the United States, and have developed your musical repertoire, your ability. You can have critique. It's a beautiful critique. Reading your book and looking at the critique, and I want to go into the book right away. And Harlan, I want to ask you to put up that picture. We want to introduce Belizeans right away to this book because you got to go get this book. Harlan, if you can put the picture of the book, and the man has the book right there, right? Yeah, there we go. And that book, an amazing piece of work because nobody has documented people like James Sullivan Martinez. And as I go through and as I look at the chapters, you gave a background history of the three cultures, the Creole, the Garifuna, and the Maya, the Mestizo, our four cultures. And you gave that historical analysis of where these peoples that came into Belize, the European contribution to the music, right? We are looking at things of how introduction of Western music, which we have always heard that Belizean music sung so very European, right? Belizean writers and music writers, the criticism of Americans looking at Belizean music is that it sung so very British, right? It sung so very British, right? And then you have covered a lot of things here. The music of Belize, the influence of early American music. Would like to hear you talk about because you touch on some of it. But Dickie, I grew up in a period in the 70s where you hear these American bands. I've never fell in love with music until I heard American bands. In Belize, we were hearing everything as you talk about when you went there, when you went to the United States, you were blessed with that ability that you could connect with everything from Latin and so forth, right? But I think that the one that had a more profound impact, correct me if you may, and talk to that if you may, is the impact African American music or Black music had on the entire Caribbean, Africa, and the world. You have played, reading your resume, your bio, you have played with an incredible amount of American musicians before you returned back to Belize to contribute and to share the information, right? Or to transfer that body of knowledge that you gained. You played with a lot of top-level R&B bands. And so you were not only developing a music skill theoretically, but you were also developing a practical application, applying it, because you were playing in top bands. You were backing up incredible artists as a saxophone player, right? You were backing up a lot of that. But talk about the impact African-American music or Black music had on Belize itself in the 70s, particularly. And when I look at that chapter, right, the influence of early American music. Talk about that if you may.
Well, when I spoke about the
Alan, keep that book up, man.
when I spoke about the influence of early American music on Belize, I was really trying to talk about James Sullivan Martinez and his music. Because well, thanks to you, I was able to get a copy of that chart of his music, right? And so what I did, I had this music program that what you gave me was a piano lead sheet, right? So I put it into this program and had a piano played back. And I was so surprised that when I heard this music, I realized, but wait a minute, this music almost has nothing to do with Belize. It's ragtime. It's ragtime. So now,
wow.
So here we are talking about ragtime, that James Sullivan Martinez wrote a piece that's in ragtime, and he did this in when? 1920
Yes.
something?
Yeah, 1920s.
Right. So how that happened? Was he a musician? Do we know? Did he play any kind of music before? You see what I'm saying? You see
Yes.
the questions I'm asking? So, how did we get there? How did he get to that point where he wrote this song? And so I am thinking that he may have had a melody in his head, and he made a trip to the United States, but he was smart enough to get somebody who knows music to write those charts for him. And of course, because ragtime was the music of the day during that period of time, that those arrangements that we get from James Sullivan Martinez are written in that vernacular of ragtime. So when I spoke about the influence of early American music, I was really trying to refer to what he wrote, and I find that amazing. So because the other question is, did he hear this music on the radio? Because that's the only way he would have been able to hear it.
Yes.
That music being played in Belize? We don't know the answers. You see, we don't have the answers. So were we influenced? How is it that we were influenced by ragtime back in the early 1920s, as far back as that? And those are just questions. But I think going back to the point where you talked about African music, how it influenced all of the New World. Well, if you listen, that's when you listen to R&B, what do you hear? Rhythm, African rhythm being played in a different way at a different time. But the question kind of goes a little bit deeper than that. And why I spoke about Africans coming into the New World is because I'm trying to make this connection, and I want us to understand our music, which is broke down.
Broke down.
That's our music. It's not jazz. It's not Latin. It's not R&B. It's not dancehall. It's none of that. Our music is broke down.
Yeah.
And we need to understand, or we should understand, what broke down is and how it developed. We have always heard, or we have always been told, that broke down developed in the Mahogany Camp. Is that true? But we heard it and we went with it, right? Question is why? I mean, when? When did it develop? How did it develop? Yeah. And so when you talk about access to instruments and that our music sound like British music, I'm trying to show how African music picked up a lot of Western music practices and incorporated that into what became our song, or became broke down to some part,
Yeah.
And then I also mentioned this guy, what's his name? Ramirez, Ramirez Cano. And he made a comment,
Yes.
And he made a comment that broke down and samba were invented in Guatemala. So if he could say that, then what do we say in terms of where broke down developed in the Mahogany Camps? Those two statements kind of counteract one another, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Ramirez Cano. I tried to call that guy because I wanted to get, he's alive, he lives in Guatemala, and I wanted to talk to him to find out how he made that statement and what was his evidence to say that broke down developed in Guatemala, while we say broke down developed in Mahogany Camp. You see? but
Did
I
Black
never took it
Mexico
out.
had anything to do with that? I mean, because Mexico had slavery and the incorporation of the Black Mexicans into Mexican music itself, the whole samba thing with the slavery emotions and feelings that was transcended across Central America.
Right.
It seems like there was like two taken from the same land in a way, right?
But they were taken from the same land, yes. But I think what we need to also look into is the fact that when the first set of slaves start coming across into this new world, they were brought by Spain and they were brought into to Mexico, let's say. And when those slaves who entered Mexico, the time they entered Mexico was like 230 years before the first slave even set foot in Belize.
Yes, indeed.
So the point I'm trying to make is that slaves or Black Africans all were present in Mexico and in the Yucatan long before Creole or slave or Africans arrived in Belize. So what happened to those slaves, those Africans who were in Mexico? What happened to them? Were they influenced by what they heard? Spanish music? Did their music change? Did they have an impact on Spanish music, or did Spanish music impact them? And I'm quite sure both things happened. And so when you look at the mahogany camps, you realize that even before the British were cutting log at the bay, at the Big or the New River,
Honduras,
they were up in around Campeche, cutting logwood up in there. You see? So did they use enslaved Africans? And when they got kicked out of that area and they came to Belize, did they bring those enslaved Africans with them? You see?
Yeah.
And I think I have to point out that Evan has always talked about the fact that we need to study what happened on the Yucatan Peninsula during the Cass War. And even before that, because people were moving back and forth all the time, even before all of that. And I think all of that has something to do with our music, how it developed and what it developed into.
That's an amazing piece of addition you added to it, because we've always heard, and interviewing people like Selwyn Peters, Mr. Peters, Boom and Shine, and you hear about the songs that they sing, and you could hear this mahogany camp thing, the whole history that was given around it, that it came from out of the mahogany camps. Maybe never, no doubt. I mean, the slaves were singing and they were dancing and they were celebrating at that time and stuff like that, but there were more historical context to it in terms of the development of Brockdown. And then how do you juxtapose Brockdown alongside Garifuna music, which is another Afro-descendant Belizean music? How do they correlate? How do they compare? But we want to do that when we come back. We'll take a short break. And when we come back, we will continue the discussion with Dickie Straughan, a Belizean musician, and I would add a legendary Belizean musician who have done incredible things. He have written his book, The Music History of Belize, and we are advising our Belizeans to get a copy because it is very, very, very historical, good information. And Dickie has broken ground in terms of maybe the first, and for me, it's the first of its kind that give us a fresh perspective of Belizean music, hence from where it comes from, and the development of all these Belizean musical art forms that we have today. And again, I want to say I'm Bilal Morris. This is Navel String Connections. This show is sponsored by the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. Our producer is Noor Mohammed, and our executive producer is XTV. Stay with us. When we come back, we will continue with our guests.
The Diaspora Relations Unit within the Ministry of Tourism, Youth, Sports, and Diaspora Relations serves as the vital link between Belizeans living abroad and the government of Belize. As a unit, we strengthen relationships, encourage engagement, ensure that Belizeans around the world remain connected to their homeland, and make sure that wherever you are, Belize still feels like home. Another major initiative managed by the unit is the Diaspora Returnee Incentive Program, DRIP. This program was established to attract Belizeans in the diaspora who are considering repatriation. Through the program, eligible returnees are entitled to import household and personal effects, tools of trade, and a personal transportation free of import duties and taxes. It's our way of saying, welcome home, and making your transition back to Belize as smooth as possible. Another important aspect of the unit's work is the coordination and distribution of in-kind donations from the Belizean diaspora and friends abroad. As a unit, we organize and host diaspora meetings with large Belizean communities. These in-person gatherings allow for open dialogue, information sharing, and collaboration between the government and its citizens overseas. Through these interactions, Belizeans abroad are informed of national initiatives and can share their perspectives, ideas, and contributions towards national growth. We also attend events held by the diaspora to continue meaningful dialogues, share updates, hear ideas and inquiries, allowing us to keep the Belizean bond strong. Visit our website to access our chat feature. It allows Belizeans abroad to connect with our team directly for any inquiries or support. We encourage all Belizeans living abroad to sign up to our registry. This will help us keep you informed about initiatives, events, and opportunities to engage with your home country. The Diaspora Relations Unit, serving Belizeans, strengthening connections, and building a bridge between the world and home.
I am a true born Belizean. Belize my home, my native land. I want you people to understand. I am proud to be a Belizean. Yo bande, yo bande. Yo bande, yo bande.
And welcome back. This is Naval String Connections. Greetings to the Belizeans across the Belizean diaspora who is watching this show and who watches the show on a weekly basis. Our sister ARIA LIGHTFOOT was live and direct last week with the Belize Diaspora Summit, which will be held on July 23rd to July 25th. We invite Belizeans across Belize itself, organization, businesses, get on board. Get into the Belize Diaspora Summit. It's third annual. The first one was held in Los Angeles, right here where I live, Los Angeles, California. And the second was in Florida. The third now is launching in Belize at the House of Culture and at the Bliss, July 23rd and the 25th, the Belize Diaspora Summit. Come on down. We invite Belizeans across the Belizean diaspora to be included in there. Various Belizean ministries will be there: Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resource, Ministry of Immigration. And we have seen where the government coming on board to the first two Belize Diaspora Summit has been very beneficiary to the Belizean diaspora. Belizean people came out in droves in the first one in Los Angeles, California, to access land and immigration resources that they could need living abroad, living in the United States, and still can keep that Belizean-ness to them. One of the main things was to have access to a piece of land. Many Belizeans have been able to access that opportunity. And so we want to say again, the Belize Diaspora Summit, July 23rd to July 25th in Belize City, Belize, live. Come on down and be a part of it. Even if you're not a part of it, come on as an audience and come and see what it's all about, right? The development of Belize from the Belizean diaspora and from Belizeans on the ground. see those two worlds merged. And again, we are back with our guest, our brother, Derrick Dickie Straughan, who is a musician, a legendary Belizean musician, who have, for me, revolutionized Belize. And I use that term a lot when I write about Bamiki Bandula and Dickie Straughan. And he, he sits there, like all of that powdering, go. He's a man of facts, Bring him the evidence. You can't be saying things to this brother and you can't provide the evidence to it, and which is us. And I would say he's a scholar. He's a musical scholar in the true word, in the true term of the word. And my brother, again, we want to welcome you back, but we want to go into that book, brother, because this is the whole purpose. You said, man, you're not going to do no launching of the book, Dickie. And I asked Harlan to put that picture up again, man, because we want to go into the depth of this. You talk about the marching bands, Dickie. And I know, man, I grew up with the marching bands. I remember seeing Brigade, Wesley Brigade. I mean, I don't know if they were drummers and just bugle. Dickie? Drummers and bugle. I mean, the quad. And I didn't think that was a quad. They were just single drums, right?
Yeah.
And there's this bugle. And the dressing and the Sunday marching through the streets. And just, we are coming out on the sidelines to watch this marching band. And I have to emphasize Brigade, Wesley Brigade marching band. But then we had Imperial marching band and many marching bands.
Two different kinds of bands.
Two different kind of bands, right, Dickie? Give us some more understanding, my brother, about what this Belizean marching band thing was about, where it came from, and what is British? Was it colonial? What was it?
I think it was very colonial. It came out of the British, yes. I think that I haven't really studied or looked into that marching band concept, but I think it was very British and it came out of the colonial system. Because if you go back to New Orleans, they had marching bands very similar to the marching bands we have in Belize, and I wrote about that in the book. And what I was trying to point out is that we had the marching bands, and the marching bands in Belize did basically the same thing those bands did in New Orleans and other parts of the States. We had, I remember in the 50s, we had the Imperial Band, and they had this drum major in front of the band who used to dance and entertain people. And he would dance just like you've seen video clips of the New Orleans.
Yeah, I've seen it, man. You're so right.
They march and they dance and all of this. He did the same thing. Matter of fact,
you say connected to the whole drum line thing of these African American colleges that have these great bands. They are just drum and tubas and trumpets and again seems to where's this is connected somehow there to the New Orleans thing at the same time, right?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. And I was referring to these marching bands of that period of time, during the 50s in Belize, and the marching bands that they had in New Orleans during that period of time, right? And I was trying to compare those two bands and what they did.
And I watched some James Bond there. I was watching a James Bond there, and it was filmed in New Orleans, right? And along come this marching band, and I was like, man, that song just like Imperial Band, right?
Yeah. I mean, they had almost the same type of performance. They did the same type of performance practices. And that's why I tell you about this guy who was a drum major of an Imperial Band called Sandy Pump. And this was probably before your time. But this guy would entertain, you know how we are in Belize, the band style, you hear music, everybody come out and check it out, come out and listen to see what's going on. So he would entertain people while he was marching, The difference is the point I was trying to make also with the New Orleans marching bands and the Belize bands like Imperial Band and so on, is that during funerals, the New Orleans band would practice a thing that they call second line, meaning that after they dropped the body at the cemetery, the band would then play a different kind of music, not slow music that they play going up. Same thing with Belize. Coming back down from the cemetery, they would play, you know, up-tempo marching music. And they would dance and carry on. And what they would do, they would visit places that the deceased during his life would visit, right? Any place that he would, whatever club he used to go, or dance hall or bar or wherever, they would go to that place. And what they did, what was so important about what they did, that during that period of time, they did what we call improvisation, collective improvisation. They would all, and this is where jazz came out of that collective improvisation that these marching bands did. So those bands were very, very significant in the development of jazz. You see, that's the point I'm trying to make. In Belize, we didn't do that. We didn't do collective improvisation. We didn't almost do improvisation at all. So I just wanted to make that point in terms of the marching bands and the practices, you know, how you would.
Was there some connection though, Dickie, with the Belize marching bands and the New Orleans marching bands around that time, the 1950s?
Well, I would say, like you said, it came out of a colonial, during that colonial period. You see, they did it. It came out of England. It came out of Europe, these marching bands. And so when blacks got access to instruments, and they did basically the same thing. And we did the same thing in Belize. We picked it up and we formed marching bands. That was a part of the colonial practice. That's where that came from.
Yeah. And as we are in New Orleans, talk about the guy Sigeri, who became a very prominent Belizean trumpet player around that time. I think you mentioned him in passing
Robert
in
Sigeri.
terms of this outstanding Belizean Sigeri that was playing around the Duke Ellington time, right? Was
earlier
he
than that.
put him in some kind of context, if you may, as a Belizean coming out of Belize, because a lot of Belizeans were migrating into New Orleans, right? It was one of the places, according to Dr. Jerome Straughan, that a lot of chain migration was going on into New Orleans. And that's how Sigeri, he highlighted that that's where how Sigeri got to New Orleans and was playing this great music. Talk about that from your book. You make a presentation on that. Talk about the musical connection there with Sigeri.
Well, see, New Orleans was one of the major shipping ports in the United States. Like you had Savannah, Georgia, you had New Orleans, you had Mobile, Alabama. So that was just one of the places of the cities that ships were docked. Sigeri, as I found out, he studied the tuba with my great-granduncle, Daniel Buller, in Mullins River. So when you ask that question about where with my involvement with music, yes, my father played, my mother played, but there's a whole generation behind them that played coming out of the Buller family.
Wow.
So he studied with Daniel Buller, and then he went to New Orleans. I think this was like 1919, somewhere around there. Interestingly is that when he arrived at that time, that just happened to coincide with the same time that Louis Armstrong was coming up, not Duke Ellington, because this is all before Duke Ellington. Louis Armstrong. Jazz was really just in its infancy and was starting to develop, coming out of the collective improvisation with the marching bands and all of this. So when he arrived in New Orleans, he arrived at a very pivotal moment in the history of jazz. And so he came out of a marching band atmosphere because he played with the volunteer guard band in Belize. So when he got to New Orleans, he joined a marching band. You see what I'm saying? So he met these musicians who were developing what became jazz.
Yes.
And so he started playing the tuba, and then while being in the States, he switched to the upright bass, and he got.
Oh, he was playing bass too.
Yeah, he played upright bass. Some of the pictures I got in the book, pictures of him.
Yes. Oh, that was him
so
there.
He did recordings playing
upright bass.
Yeah, he did many recordings playing the tuba and upright bass.
Yeah, you did a very interesting and I would say in-depth thing on Sigeri, because I've read about him through Dr. Straughan's compilation. He had researched it and he brought that to my view. I didn't even know. Just like James Sullivan Martinez, we didn't know about these outstanding Belizeans who were musical, you know,
Mhm.
who are musical artists and
Mhm.
musicians
Mhm.
and people who contributed to the development
Yeah,
of that, right?
yeah.
But yeah, the marching band and
The marching bands
basically,
were very, very important.
yeah, it was
Very,
very prominent
yes.
in Belize itself. And then Dickie, you went on and you talk about the whole you touched on it a little bit, the patriotic compositions, um, which we grew up with, you know. But Dickie, one of the things that I remember growing up as a boy was hearing all this British colonial music on the radio in the morning. You remember that?
Yeah,
Right? Yeah, yeah. So
yeah.
that's why I said that the criticisms of mostly African Americans towards Belizean music is that why you all sung so British,
Well,
right?
I love that music and I hate that music because I
You
like the
love it?
music, the musical part of it.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't so much like the lyrics because
Right,
the
right, right.
lyrics all about, you know, praising the colonial master and all of this and that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the
It's very much
music
the
itself,
symbolism behind it, right?
yeah, yeah,
But it
yeah,
was great music. Yeah,
yeah.
it was
No
great
two ways
music.
about it.
Well played
Dr.
and
Young put a
very
book
well put
together.
together.
He
How
put a
much
book
you
together.
think that music there have influenced those of us who have written? Because in the national anthem, the music in the national anthem, you can hear some of that influence, right? That Selwyn Young was putting into the spirit that was going into that. And you hear a lot of the Belizean patriotic songs. You can tell that we were heavily influenced by that kind of music. Talk about that, if you may, how that may have influenced those people, Belizean musicians and musical writers who were
Well,
composing music for
well,
patriotic songs.
that's a question that it's a funny question to me because when you look at those arrangements in that period of time, they were dated, meaning that they took place between 1930, 40, 50, somewhere around there, right? And so the musicians who played in those bands, like the Colonial Band and the Lucky Strike Band and the marching bands, they also played in dance bands and they played a different kind of music in that period of time, right? What happened after 1960? Our whole musical concept changed.
Changed.
That's when you had the Lord Rayburn combo and you had the Messengers and you had this, and music has changed. The point I'm trying to make is our musical interests seem to have changed, has departed from what used to be, where those musicians were trying to write songs of certain quality. We don't have that today.
Yeah.
And that started back around 1960. So we have departed completely from that concept or that way of looking at music, and we're not doing that anymore, you know, which is sad.
Yeah, it's sad. And,
I think because we are losing we have lost a whole lot because of that change. People don't hardly, between 1960 and let's say 2000, our musicians didn't really do a whole lot of studying. They didn't. They just picked up an instrument and played.
And Prof Drummond talk about the coming of Eric Dean, which was this big band.
I remember that.
Coming into Belize and playing, you know, at the time, Belizean musicians were playing that kind of music at the time. You're talking about the Imperial Band, right?
Well, not Imperial Band particularly, but during that period of time when Eric Dean came to Belize, we had the Deep Harmony.
Yeah, Deep Harmony.
Yeah, we had those orchestras. We had Melody Swingers. We had those big bands who played the same kind of thing. These guys were just better musicians and better players. And, you know, I don't even know if that's the right word, but I was a child when my mother took me to, I think it was Majestic Theater, to listen to one of them bands. But we had bands back in those during that period of time, you know. So,
and it was mostly instrumental, right? The kid they brought that most of the music at the time, there was not a lot of singing, right? It was just a lot of instrumentation.
No. I think I don't look. Like I said, I was a child, but I'm quite sure those bands kind of copied, like the American Duke Ellington Big Band. You had a singer. They played a lot of instrumental music, but they had singers because that's the kind of music that they were playing. So there was a
swing and all of that, right?
Yeah, swing, Latin music. Because remember now, during the 50s, Latin music was very popular.
Yeah.
Very, very, very popular.
And
Paris.
it really is tied into that whole Caribbean thing, right, Dickie, with
That
Calypso
too.
and the ska, and we hold out the offshoot of that period into the 60s and the 60s and the 70s, right? Um,
I think I just lost my video.
yeah, your video, we lost your video.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, we'll give you a chance to get it back. This is Navel String Connections. I'm Bilal Morris, and we are speaking with our brother, Derrick Dickie Straughan, live out of Houston. We're gonna give a chance before he gets back so that he can set up his video. But we want to say again, this show is sponsored by the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. I'm Bilal Morris, live from my studio here in Los Angeles. We want to thank our executive producers, XTV, our producer, Nur Mohammed. And again, we want to tell you to invite Belizeans who are watching this show across the length and breadth of Belize. Tell your folks abroad about Navel String Connections, the Belizean show in the Belizean diaspora. They may not know that this show is on. This is a show that is in its 2.5-year inception. We are trying to help bring those voices, right? Those voices from across the Belizean diaspora into Belize itself through the XTV, this dynamic Belizean grassroots radio and television institution in Belize City here. It's a great opportunity for you to be in contact with your Belizeans. It says now with technology, the world is one room, right? And here it is. We have our brother Derrick Dickie Straughan live out of Houston. You don't even have to come to LA. You don't even have to go to Belize and the XTV studio. The man there right there in a studio itself. As we know, that's a music man. We could see behind the scene there his musical studio. And like you were saying, Dickie, continue before you lost your video. Yeah. We were talking about the whole fact that bands like Eric Dean and the Influence, those bands have the offshoots into bands like the Melody Singers, Melody Swingers, and other bands. But what is very interesting is the development of those bands, like the Messengers, right? And which outcome the outstanding players that we know as legends. A lot of Belizeans my age or younger may not have got a chance to hear the Messengers. You Light Henderson and the Messengers. And I remember in your book, you took bands like Jesus Acosta and the Professionals, right? Lord Rayburn combo with Pablo Clark. And you took I think it was the guitar player, and you just did a whole musical analysis on that, man, which was so beautiful. Talk about those bands, Dickie, that emerged out of the 60s, the Lord Rayburn combos with Pablo Clark and the Bud Bank winnings, and what you were able to do in sort of analyzing the musical content, right? The how Belizean music progressed within the band thing and the kind of music that we were playing, despite of the fact that information, like you say, was not all there, but that we Belizean musicians worked with what they had, right? We talk about the marching bands, the big bands, the arrival of Eric Dean in there and the whole Imperial Band and all that. But here comes now the bands of the 60s, of the 70s, right? Talk about that period and what were you able to do in the book when you analyze those bands?
Well, I did an analysis of the one song that was on that first album that Lord Rayburn produced, and it was Diane's Bossa Nova, a tune that's written by Herman Bennett.
Yes.
And I did that because I was trying to demonstrate to our musicians today the kind of music that was being played then compared to the kind of music that is being played now. I was trying to bring to them the comparison of the interest that those musicians had back in those days compared to the interest that we have today. And they're not the same. They're completely different. You know, Herman was the kind of guy as a guitar player. I got to play with him with Funky Bridge, and he was the kind of guy who always
So he was on Funky Bridge.
he was, and I was too.
You played on Funky Bridge too. Yeah,
Yes.
I hear the music of Funky Bridge.
Right.
Yes.
Let me tell you, I was like elated to be playing with all these guys who were older musicians than myself. Pablo Clark, Herman Bennett, Sess, who else was there? Chuck Gladden was there.
Wow.
Nelson, the tenor player, used to play. All these guys played with Raymond and other groups, and I was like, you know, I was kind of I never played with any of these groups in Belize. So it's like for me, that was a big deal, you know. But anyways, what impressed me about Herman is that he was the kind of guy who was always interested in chords. So, you know, he could play different chords and so on and so forth, you know. And you can see a little bit of it in that song that he wrote. To me, in my opinion, for my liking, that was the best song on that album. Most people gravitate to the Bud Bank Wedding, you know. Naturally, there's nothing wrong with that, but I particularly like that song because the progressions that was involved that song had in it, you know, just to show the kind of interest that these musicians had, regardless of the fact that they didn't have a whole lot of information, but they listened to records and they heard certain things and they tried to copy it and they tried to reproduce it, you know. And I think he did a pretty damn good job on that one song, you know. And so I did the analysis.
Very, very, very much so. You talk about too, Nikki, we were listening to a lot of classical music. I remember the classical music radio programs, as well as the BBC Top of the Pops, where you were hearing Hendrix and rock and, you know, pop, but also we were hearing great Sunday evening, this classical music program, which, you know, birthed some of our top Belizean classical musical artists like Francis Rino, right? Who became a concert pianist, right? Who studied at a very, very high level, came back to Belize occasionally and contribute, like yourself. I have transferred music information to a high cadre of Belizean musicians today, musical artists. Talk about the influence of classical music on Belizean music, to the Belizean music then and Belizean music now. I mean, the impact that it had around your time while you were studying with people like Mr. Andrews, right? Classical music was very, very, very prominent. A lot of your music teachers, Flas Casasola, a lot of these people, Lara Stain, as you mentioned, these people that you wrote about in your book, were teaching classical music.
Yeah.
How did classical music coexisted along with the traditional Belizean music styles like Brockdown? Did it have an influence?
I don't know if it had an influence. That will take some more research and investigation, but certainly classical music is very important because that is the foundation of all the music that we play, whether it's jazz, calypso, Latin. We're using those principles that were developed in classical music. You see? So studying classical music is very important. And studying classical music, because of what it does in terms of allow you to improve dexterity, playing certain different, you know, forms and stuff like that. So it has a place. Most of the great jazz musicians studied classical music. You see? So everybody starts with that. You may branch off and go into jazz or whatever, but classical music is still very important because that's the foundation. That's the Western music. That's the music that developed all of what they did during that period of time. Is what we are doing now, and that is those concepts of classical music that got into what we call Brockdown, or into what is African music, and it became Brockdown. a lot of people will not agree with me that Brockdown has classical European music in it, but it does. Whether
Yeah,
you like it
I
or
like
not,
when you say that, Dickie.
yes, whether
Yes,
you like it or not, it does.
yes,
Because Africans play drums. And that's why I went to the trouble in the book to show people where the guitar came from,
there you go,
where
you
the
did.
organ came from.
The
It wasn't
accordion,
developed,
you
you know, all of these are European instruments.
did.
And
Instruments.
that's why I talked about access to instruments. So when we got access to those instruments, we also got access to that form of music. And of course, when we put that with the drums and we put it together with what we are as Africans, the product was brought down. You see? So classical music is very important. That's, you know.
Well, I want to just sort of take a tangent into your musical. When you say you played with Funky Bridge, you also had a little stint with the other band in New York, the Web, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you played with the Web, but I know there was a lot of Belizean musicians in New York that you may have crossed their path. And one of particular I wanted to talk to you about, being that he was in your kind of category, was Sonny Bobby. Talk about the work that you did, because I remember one time Sonny Bobby came to Belize and he played with Bamike Bandula, right? Right, Dickie?
No,
He never did.
no.
I think I remember that he came there and he performed with the band, but
You must have performed with
that's why
somebody
I'm
else.
starting to be corrected. And
Right,
you were the leader of that band, and you know.
right.
But talk about those Belizean musicians in New York, man, because you talk about, Gladden and all of them, but particularly of interest is the web, your work with the web
Yeah,
and with
yeah,
people like Sonny Bobby and
yeah.
Pablo Clark's son, Ronald Clark, who
Ronald, yeah,
played a
yeah.
great saxophone like yourself.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know Bobby a hell of a lot. I didn't know him much in Belize. I was aware of his presence. Him and John used to hang out together.
Okay.
And so I was more familiar with John. And I know at one point both of them played with Sam and Dave. John and Sonny Bobby. They played with Sam and Dave for a while. And yes, I wasn't an official member of the Web, but there were guys who I hung out with, and we all used to hang out around Decatur Street by Compton Fairweather's house. So we had gone to school together and we became friends. So we hung out together, but I was not an official member of the Web, but I played with them on several occasions, yes.
So would you say, Dickie, that we Belize had jazz players? We're talking about Majelle Melvin, Majelle McGregor, yourself, Sonny Bobby. Talk about that whole aspect, because Belizeans are like, oh man, Belizeans never made to play jazz. I don't know about no Belizeans ever play jazz,
Now
right?
you see, you're looking to get me in trouble. You're really looking to get me in trouble, because the thing is, they played but had no idea what they were really playing. I hate to say it, but you asked the question, but they had great inspiration. They had a love. They practiced and they played, but the information was missing.
So we know we have the Dickie Straughan book on Belizean music history, written by an incredible, well-trained, learned Belizean musician. When are we going to have the Dickie Straughan album?
I don't know when that's going to happen, man.
You have to leave something of your legacy, bro.
Yeah. I have been doing a lot of playing lately.
But have it inspired you, Dickie, that you would like Quincy Jones and them lay down something?
Well, I wrote this
body of work, maybe a 10-piece song of original stuff.
I don't know. I wrote this book for the specific reason of trying to shed some light for Belizean musicians of who we are and what we are probably capable of doing if we would just take the time to look at music.
Harlan, can you put the book up?
In a more academic way. And I think that is more important than anything else. I may be wrong, but that's the reason I wrote this book, for us to look at our history, understand our history, recognize the fact that we do have a history, because music didn't just begin in 1960. No, it goes all the way back, much further than that. So if we know our history, probably that will help us to create a better future for ourselves.
You have covered a lot of stuff in this book, bro. And, we need 2 shows to really go into the deep content of all the stuff but particularly of interest for me was the Belizean dance bands, the Harmonettes, Lord Rayburn combo with Junie Crawford and Nelson Fuller. I'm talking about that 70s period. Come out of the 60s with the Prof. Drummond, Lord Rayburn, and Pablo Clark. Now we're going into the 70s. Jesus Acosta and the Professionals, the Harmonettes. Before you came with Bamiki Bandula Vibrations, so many Belizean dance bands. When you arrived in 79 or 80, Dickie, what were you hearing? Were these musicians, they were copying, right? Because Bamiki Bandula is known for the fact that Dickie Strong brought originality, to be creative, to start making, we having funk bands in the Caribbean like T Connection. That was right up there with these great African-American dance bands. That was cutting records, putting out stuff. You played with a lot of R&B, African-American R&B musicians and bands and artists, right? But talk about the Belizean dance bands, because they were playing everything. And they were sculling, like what you call sculling. A lot of them couldn't read and write music. They were playing music by ear. Talk about that period, if you may, during your at the advent of your arrival into Belize, back from your musical training.
Well, I think I kind of touched on that earlier when I was telling you about information. It's just the trying to bring information to musicians. So rather than you hear something, but you're not quite sure what you're hearing, and you try to do your best to reproduce what you're hearing, but you don't know what it is.
Yes.
So because you don't know what it is, it's kind of difficult to reproduce it exactly, and even to be able to work with it and change it at will. You see, so that was the kind of situation that I met when I came to Belize, and that has always been in Belize. I think one of the things that I tried to do with the band is we played more spirited. We had more spirit in our playing, that we put more energy, because that's what I was used to. All the musicians I played with in the States, it was about they put themselves into the music, that energy, So I wanted to make that a part of the band, and I think, and fortunately, we had a group of guys who, were pretty good musicians before that, and so it wasn't very, very difficult. It was difficult in some ways because there were some things that I tried to teach them that they resisted, and it took a long time to get that across. But then there were some things that they were able to understand more quickly. So that was that situation,
Beautiful, beautiful. And we are running out of time, my brother. I had so many parts of this book that I wanted you to go into: the arrival of Steel Pan, the migration, the formation of Punta Rock. But we will have left that part 2 of the Kistran, man. And you got to promise us that you will come back. You will come back again. Harlan, let's put the book up. As we wrap up, let's have the book up, because I want the brother to give his let's have the book up, Arlen. I want to say that this is Navel String Connections. I'm Bilal Morris, and we are in the wrap-up period of the show with Derrick Dickie, and we want to say that this show is sponsored by the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. I'm Bilal Morris, live from my studio here. And we want to give Derrick Dickie last comments, and then we will wrap up. My brother, you got about a couple seconds. Talk about the book and what, hopefully, where do you plan to go from there in terms of the book itself?
I don't know where I'm going to go.
Is there going to be a launching in Belize?
I haven't planned one as yet. I don't know, but specifically, this book is to really commemorate the names of the musicians who came before us, the people that go, back to early 1800s, the people that Mr. Andrews spoke about that. And we have to be careful that we don't repeat the same history where these names are forgotten. We cannot allow that to happen. That's the reason I wrote this book. It is important that we remember all our musicians, we document their names, and we keep the history going, because if we don't have that, what are musicians in the future, what are they going to relate to? So we have to do a good job or a better job at recording and documenting our history for the future musicians so that they have it. That's the whole purpose of this book. And I hope people who read it at least get that out of it, or whatever else they can. But it's to memorialize and to make sure these names of our old musicians or early musicians are not forgotten. You know, that's what is important to me, you know, more than anything else.
Yeah. Thank you, my brother. We have been listening to an in-depth conversation with Derrick "Dickie" Straughn, a Belizean musician, legendary Belizean musician, live right here on XTV. And again, we want to thank you for watching. And we're going to say again, finally, the show is sponsored by the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. I'm Bilal Morris. Tune in again next week to another episode of Navel String Connections. Again, make sure that we come on through to the Belize Diaspora Summit, July 23rd to the 25th. And again, thank you for watching.
I am a true born Belizean. Belize my home, my native land. I want you people to understand. I am proud to be a Belizean.